Welcome. So this video is going to be about the effective dialogue of intimacy. So I'm going to give you an overview. This is going to take about, 30 minutes to 45 minutes to really just give an overview of what it is and the details, but we cannot really go into all 21 rules within 45 minutes. That by itself is a course. I'm going to come up with that course as well, where we go into detail each of those rules. But now, within the next 30 minutes or so, we can get the gist of it, a very compact synopsis of what is effective dialogue. So let me start with this. Well, I'm sure there are people in your life that you have some kind of a unpleasant interaction with, right? So if for some people it's the spouse, for others it's the siblings, for others it's the children. So significant individuals that you have, family members. Let me just ask you, if I asked you, let's have a session. Let's do a therapy session or educational session, workshop together with the person that you don't get along with. What comes up in you if I ask you to imagine? Give you a minute. You can pause this video and just go through list some of your emotions. Now we can look at that list, and I'm sure that many of you have this gut feeling that immediately comes up. If I ask you to sit down with somebody that you don't get along with, immediately this feelings of anxiety comes up, or even at times, sadness, depression, if you will. So those feelings, and I want you to start paying attention to the fact that these feelings are most likely, if you go through your list, um, indication of certain behaviors, actually. For instance, let's say if you say something like, well, if I ask you what is that frustration, you say you're afraid to be disappointed or feel rejected or feel dismissed or feel maybe even aggressively bullied or assaulted. All those are behaviors, right? So there's when it comes to an interaction with another person, and there's that anxiety. If we break it down and go to this anxious feeling and worrisome and a little bit fear and a little bit, again, those painful experiences, and then we break it further down, it comes down to this anticipation of a behavior that is not pleasant. And as I mentioned to you earlier, the list is usually revolving around those feelings of not feeling heard, understood, empathized with, supported, loved, appreciated, valued. And those are specifically what we can do here is pay attention to how does that happen? What is the proof? What is the evidence when we say somebody is feeling dismissed? Well, evidence is usually by what we observe in the other person, right? And that observation is very important. In the way a person responds can be both verbal as well as nonverbal, as most likely communication is to a big majority, about 60, 70, 80% of it is nonverbal, and really a small portion of it are words, such as the way a person enters the room, the eye contact. Do they shake hands? Do they give a hug to each other? Proximity, are they close to one another or not? Kind of, do they have this aura of huffing and puffing with each other, or cowering, or just distancing and being scared toward one another? Body contact, body posture, facial expression, presence, proximity, all those are the 60-70% of nonverbal part of the communication. Then the rest is the words that are being exchanged. So here we know that most people, in most situations of conflict, when we ask someone, how come you don't get along? What's going on in your relationship? What would they do? They would sit there immediately and talk about their pain. We always have this pain-driven, pain-focused, pain-centered approach toward one another. Comes at times sounds like complaining, and many people say this person just complains. They only complain, right? So where does that come from? That's part of that subconscious area that I mentioned to you earlier in the prelude. If you haven't watched that video, you got to watch this. But it comes from this perspective, if you will, almost like this perseverance um, and uh, uh, and preserving our own need for containment, for validation. So we tend to, crumble a little bit and go inward, and so become so hyper focused on our painful experience. So that's just natural. That's just natural. Now, then it takes years for a person to really just overcome that and kind of be able to separate these, because we are consumed by it. Our whole neurobiology, our hormones, our neural pathways are just kind of triggered, and it's hard to separate that without adequate training. But so if you ask two people to sit down, what happens naturally is that they're kind of guarded, especially in this type of situations. They're full of anticipation of escalation of the problem. They're full of anticipation of their worries, anxieties, disappointments, you name it. All those, agitation that's kind of propping up or surfacing, and not being able to be in control, or not being able to come to a resolution, or not being able to get to a happy, connection and interaction. So as a result, so the tensing up, the pain focus orientation kicks in, and the first thing people do, really, that's the very important part of the difference between debate and argument and dialogue, is that the mind goes toward this all or none thinking. This is very important. I want you to keep that in mind. What is that all or none thinking? Generally, it seems like a good thing, but it is not a good thing. This kind of sounds paradoxical, but that's from my experience. I'm sharing that with you, that people want to seek agreement. Seeking agreement is an all or none thinking. It's a dichotomous thing. But basically, people end up either agreeing with each other or disagreeing with each other, all or none thinking. And if the mindset is let's reach an agreement, then we set ourselves up for very specific preordained steps that lead us toward argument and debate. So what I want to do here is really just kind of help you change the entire scenery, change the entire interaction, the entire atmosphere. We've got to be on the right track. It's like if you want to go to, a city, you got to get on the right road. We can't just randomly get somewhere and say, hopefully I'm going to end up in that city. It's not going to work. Same thing with the dialogue versus debate. The first part of the road is not to seek agreement. You got to let go. It's not about an agreement. Now, you may be wondering what it is about. Well, it is about understanding. That's what it is about. Now, also, you may be wondering, well, how can we then take understanding to the next level of actually collaborating and coexisting? Doesn't that require some kind of being on the same page, aka agreement? It does, but there's a big difference. Let me share with you what happens usually. When people, the mindset is I have to seek agreement, which means that either I have to get the other person to change their mind, or I end up changing my mind. We end up on that track toward argument and debate. And ultimately, we have to either capitulate or kind of coerce the other person. And usually none of those end well. And if we coerce the other person ends up with resentment, which is not good for long-term relationship. Or if we feel capitulated and coerced, then we end up with resentment, and that's not good for a long-term relationship either. So, and that seemingly there may be some agreement, at least short term, but it's futile long term. So when we change our mindset, getting into a interaction with one another, and relenting, letting go of the need for an agreement, what we do is we open up a space with the goal of pursuing understanding and maybe not even having agreement. What happens then? Then there is no coercion and there is no capitulation. So there's going to be understanding, 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 and maybe being on different pages and still understanding each other and acknowledging that we are on different pages until these two people understand each other so well that something magical happens. When there is that inner comfort that I'm fully understood, that I'm fully supported by the other person, naturally agreement follows. So it's going to be a voluntary agreement rather than a coerced or capitulated agreement. So the agreement is a natural consequence that follows understanding if we don't seek agreement. Only if we don't seek agreement. It only happens if we let go of that need for agreement. If you're willing to remain vulnerable, open-minded, curious, and on this journey of discovering each other and one another. So that's really the mindset. And something else also very important happens, which is because our goal is to understand the other person, a few traits and characteristics, a few neurobiological processes that happen in individuals shift from dysfunctional state to functional states. So let me give you a few examples of that. One important thing here is the method, and that's where we are shifting a little bit from the content of communication to process of communication. So the method of engagement, of interaction, of conversation or conversing with one another in debate and dialogue is about telling. It's encompassed by, or it's labeled, known as telling one another. Debates, what do people do? They tell each other. Two people, they say, hey, this is my opinion. This is what's right and wrong. This is what should be doing, what should be happening. And the other person just mimics, just does the same exact thing. Wonderful for political scenes, wonderful for like public displays and debates and things like that. And then there is an audience to make a decision. But the worst thing that can happen in a romantic relationship, and we see the consequences and aftermath a lot of times in the children of families growing up, right? They're the audience of the mom and dad debating and arguing with one another all the time. There are two losers always, which is mom and dad. And actually, on top of that, the kids are also losers, unfortunately. And by losers, I mean everybody experiences trauma. So we have to get rid of that. And really in romantic, meaningful, close, intimate relationships, family relationships as well, we have to focus on shifting from this telling method, kind of imposing our thoughts and feelings and values and morality of our own morals onto the other, to that was the more dysfunctional method, to the more functional method, which then shifts it to dialogue. What is a functional method of discovering morality? Instead of telling, what we have to do is we have to ask questions. So for thousands of years, there is a very famous method of asking questions that you probably most likely are aware of, which is called Socratic questioning. And the reason that Socrates and Socratic questioning is very powerful and that we implement in effective dialogue is that it builds up on layers and layers of curiosity. So it is designed inherently to empathically discover the reasons and the depth of reasoning of the speaker. So a listener would ask questions of the speaker or to the speaker. So the listener engages in curiosity, despite the fact that they may agree or disagree, that's not relevant. They engage in this process of curiosity, getting to know, understanding the reasoning, the depth of logical, emotional processes of the speaker, of the person who is frustrated, agitated, emotional, whatnot. It's like in pain. And then one question would get an answer. It then would be summarized by the listener. And there's a reason for what I will get to that later. And then would also ask for clarification for that summary, whether or not the listener understood, and follow that up with another question. So it's like a building, like Lego land, if you will, right? You're building up something. You're building up better understanding. You're building up a story, the narrative, the whole truth about this other person. So you're kind of digging deeper and deeper and deeper into a much more meaningful presence with the other person. That is one thing that we shift from this functional approach, process, to a functional approach and process. Now, interestingly, as I mentioned, there are multiple subconscious processes going on. One of them is how we approach the individual, the person in front of us. The other one is the actual listening. Now, if you engaged in this type of dialogue, and I asked you, let's say you were two people in the room, one person is talking, the other person is listening, and I would ask the listener to summarize what the speaker said. Something interesting happens all the time. It's just foolproof every time. It's just predictable. If I ask the listener to summarize, repeat, restate, paraphrase, rephrase what this speaker said, they would have a huge difficulty doing so. Even though it's just kind of silly and you kind of parroting, like some people say, "Are you sure?" I'm just gonna say what this person said. Yes, but they can't do it. And you ask them, "Well, why can't you do it?" Because they don't remember. They don't remember. This is the most amazing phenomenon I have seen. And when you dig deeper into this, when the speaker is talking, the listener is listening to the inner processes as they are triggered in response to what the speaker is saying. So, for instance, the speaker may say something like, "I feel you don't understand my anxiety, where it comes from. You usually belittle me. If I try to, talk to you about my worries, you just are dismissive and skip over it and shut the door on me and leave the room, and you don't want to even be interested, blah, 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 blah," right? So now the listener is hearing what? They're not really hearing these words and the actual, depiction of what is happening in the inner world of the speaker. The listener is hearing, "I am no good. I am being criticized. I am not good enough. I made a mistake and this person is pointing it out. They are not happy with me. They are complaining about my behavior. What did I do wrong? What could I have done better? Why are they not more, appreciative of all the sacrifice I do in this relationship?" That's what they're listening to. They're not actually paying attention. They're kind of hearing. They're kind of observant and like a soundboard. Yes, the words are landing here, but the listener is actually, all this inner attention is to inner emotions, inner processes that are happening. And right there, what you have is a beginning of a clash coming up, because again, there's not much of an actual communication and conversation. I mean, effective communication. There is some communication conversation, but it's completely ineffective because everything is triggering deep-rooted, painful emotions, everything. And then as soon as, and this is one of the other subconscious processes that happen is that one person feels criticized, whether it's happening intentionally or not, consciously or not, doesn't matter. If the subjective experience of a person is being criticized or attacked or dismissed or rejected or invalidated, there is a very predictable automatic human response that pops up, and that's defense. Every human being, guaranteed, I guarantee that, there's no other way, every human being defends against these perceived criticism, attack, rejection, etc. That doesn't even have to happen on the side of the listener. See, the talker can be talking and the listener is listening, and then suddenly there's like a non-verbal message that's being sent. Eye rolling, shifting your head, sigh, what else? Like looking down or frowning. All those messages can be perceived, even by the talker who is talking, as I am being dismissed, I'm being invalidated, I'm being not appreciated. So, no, both we have two people, and that's the chaotic nature that happens within relationships. Now we have two people who started with all their anxiety and anticipation, and then they kind of sink deeper into their pain-oriented, experience, and then on top of that they feel even more attacked and criticized. So this whole defense comes up and then just catapults both parties even further into their painful self, painful aspect of their relationship. And so as you see, I wanted to mention that this whole thing is a process. If the process is that the person is seeking agreement, they go into a room, sit down with the other person, and they need agreement, they end up becoming two talkers to each other. They don't engage in the good listening. They're just blurting out, almost vomiting, emotional vomiting, everything that's inside, and they expect to be understood and heard. And then they feel criticized and attacked and invalidated, and it escalates from there. And ultimately, you end up with somebody giving up or violence. So, or complete disengagement. There's three options. Either people walk away from another, throw in the towel, and say, I'm done. Boom, I'm out. So, disengagement. Or one person, for whatever need that they have, a lot of times they're situational components, shared resources that cannot be separated from, shared responsibilities with kids or finances, etc. Still emotional connection or need, or again, and a lot of times, whether that's truly the case or not, a feeling of love that people say, I still love this person, and so forth. So many reasons that full disengagement doesn't happen. But one person will have to capitulate. There's no other way to solve this conundrum, except with one person kind of crumbling, into almost like a subsistent organism, but not happy, and the other person agitated, overpowering organism and not happy, and then they just kind of create this unified, dysfunctional relationship that lasts for whatever time until it cannot be maintained. Or the third option is no, nobody is giving in, nobody is moving away, boom, and there you have violence. So as I mentioned, those processes need to be changed. We need to be vigilant about them and setting the stage right from the get-go. So when we change our mindset, we engage in the actual role taking, the role of a listener, the role of a talker, and then we have to certainly finesse our way through the details and nuances of this discussion and communication. Then something else happens through that Socratic questioning, refraining from criticism, then gradually we actually create something that within the, what they call it, polyvagal system of social engagement within the neurobiological field of psychology, that as a result of this healthy engagement and understanding between two people and feeling really understood, because remember, the goal of that Socratic questioning that I mentioned earlier is to unfold these layers one after other to get to the bottom line of where a person can completely be vulnerable and safe and understood and contained at the same time by their partner. Then a very beautiful and gratifying sense of security and contentment and grounding sets in, where everything will be fine. You will be in a state where you feel, yeah, we can disagree with one another, but so what? It doesn't matter. We come to an understanding. We are looking at one thing differently, and I know exactly why. And I know exactly. It's not a very uncertain unknown. I have no clue what you're talking about, but I can disagree with you. No, not that. I know exactly where you come from, based on your experience, based on your upbringing, based on your interactions, based on your years and years of, meaningful, varied experience with your world. The way you organize the world around you is this. To give you an example, for instance, one person may be highly, I would say, organized and kind of to some extent rigid, to some extent, very orderly, very scripted, or always following a protocol, or very systematic in their approach. So that exists for a reason, for a purpose. This is how this person is organizing their world, how they create security and certainty and predictability and sustainability and consistency in their world, in their inner and outer world. That's how they can handle stress in life. That's how they cope with themselves and the environment. But that doesn't work for everyone. So that person may be a spouse, a child, or a parent to somebody who just doesn't function that way. That other person may be, really kind of overwhelmed and overly triggered by structure, by rigidity, by protocol, by following rules, by principles. Their MO and coping style and self-containment, self-soothing, and control of the environment relies heavily on spontaneity, on creativity, on just randomness, on all kinds of risk taking, on unpredictability, etc. To the extent that is actually functional, by the way, not chaotic in nature. But so now, what do we do? You can you create a sensible communication and dialogue and interaction between those two people? Yes, if you put the time and effort and so forth. This is just one example. Now, some of the other things we will notice in the creating an effective dialogue, as I had mentioned to you, is some other subconscious needs, expectations, desires, such as one of the biggest ones is attachment styles. There's early attachment style, research that shows or sheds light on a lot of this, let's say, subconscious needs that are being triggered in the moment. To give you one example, there is indication that a lot of people who have anxious attachment or ambivalent anxious, as well as they call it preoccupied attachment style, they may heavily rely on other people for emotional regulation. So so in a coupledom, the way it looks like is that if there is a conflict, there's a strife, if there's a disagreement, the anxious person does not know how to self-regulate, how to calm down themselves, how to distract themselves. The only way they end up feeling good is that if they get their partner to immediately address the situation. So they are relentless and they want the partner to come into agreement, and that escalates that same problem and processes we talked about. And then if they're together with somebody who actually has what we call an avoidant attachment style, their coping style around stress has developed in a fashion that we call more of a, internal, kind of introspective and reserved and distanced type of self-regulatory stress regulation. So what they do is they tend to uh, go inward, they detach and disconnect a little bit from their environment. They become quieter. They lose eye contact. They focus innerly. They try to kind of compose themselves. So they kind of withdraw. And a lot of times with this relationship, with you have an anxious attachment style and the avoidant attachment style, you get this cat and mouse game, right? So back and forth, back and forth. One withdraws, the other one pursues, and then you have a little bit of explosion, and then it reverses the roles, and it becomes very, very messy. So that's very much subconscious. Most people are not aware of their own attachment style around anxiety and stress. So what we will do in the sense of establishing that dialogue of intimacy, an effective dialogue, we will help people become aware of these moments where one verbal or non-verbal kind of gesture from our partner can kind of trigger that type of anxiety management style, and we become more aware of how we can take care of our own self and become less codependent on one another and more kind of internally self-reliant and what we call self-differentiated. When we engage in all these, then we can also change that process of dialogue. The whole thing changes from having to, hurry up and rush through a conversation and communication in order to solve something because we have a very, kind of a fast-paced lifestyle, to a more, manageable, contained, and directed type of a communication style with one another, where we are really in the moment, we're really present. We know that we disagree with one another, but we are kind of heightening our sensory experience, our intellectual experience, our emotional experience. Our senses and resources, faculties are honed and heightened and maximized to a level where we can actually deal with the situation. We can handle the situation, and we walk away with, again, that is not maybe an agreement, but it's an understanding. Okay, I know what my partner goes through. They seem to have gotten some stuff about me. They kind of have a little bit of more tolerance about what I'm going through. And yeah, we're gonna make it. We're gonna make it through this. It's gonna be okay. Now, as a result of really engaging in this process of effective dialogue of intimacy, over time, what happens is life gets better. And, relationships become more meaningful, more happier, more relaxed. So anxiety kind of subsides. The darkness, subsides. There is more light. There is more hopefulness. There is more energy. There is more capability, adequacy, in sense of value. Self-esteem is increased, and that sense of confidence and groundedness, that is intensified. So people become a lot more tolerant toward life itself and one another, and toward deficiencies, inadequacies, inefficiencies, like here and there. So kind of they normalize what is happening on a daily basis, and they know deep down that it's gonna be okay. We're gonna handle it. We're gonna be fine with it. So it really leaves the center stage. That stress leaves the center stage. What enters the center stage is confidence, is hopefulness, is love, is appreciation, is gratification, and a sense of what we call ultimately that connectedness. You feel connected to somebody who loves you, and they feel connected to you, and they know that you love them no matter what. And it's all in a matter of how to go about the situation, and the confidence that you know that you're adequate, you will be capable of traversing this field, this journey together, and really create a much calmer, much more peaceful level of interaction and engagement with one another. These were just a few elements I thought I'd throw in here in terms of what are the benefits and the differences between that effective dialogue of intimacy versus debate and argument. There's a lot more to that. Like I mentioned, I probably just mentioned 4 out of those 21 rules. There are multiple other important aspects, and these are really components. It's like, let me tell you, like, for instance, if you were dancing, like you go disco dancing, right? You go to a bar or a dance club, and you just roam around and just just gonna move your arms and feet and say, yeah, that's dancing, that's fine, and you're having fun. But there's a difference between that type of dance, freestyle dancing, and then a rhythmic, let's say, dancing, such as and a harmonized dancing, such as tango, or salsa, or cha-cha, or waltz, you name it. So formal dancing. And that's the thing. I like to bring this up as an example that most people live their relationships like a freestyle dancing. They just anything goes, and they hope for the best. I don't know where that confidence comes from. How we learned that everything randomly is going to be fine. I have no clue how people rely on that very, very ineffective and chaotic assumption that just happen, just talking to each other randomly and say whatever is on our mind should end up in a very happy relationship. Just as much as we can't expect 2 people coming together and master a tango, Argentinian tango, just randomly. How can they establish that? How is that even possible? Why would they even expect such an outcome? And I don't know why they expect a good outcome from relationships when they are not aware of what are the components of the relationships. Now, as that analogy continues, if you wanted to really master ballroom dancing, you would hire an instructor, listen to the specific instructions, and then practice it. Basically, go through all kinds of levels of instruction. There is, for instance, with dancing, there is you have to learn about rhythm, music, tempo, the steps, the kind of roles that the leader versus follower take, the different styling moves, the room that you have to kind of move around, the timing, everything. So it has different levels, and then when people learn that and put it together and practice it, they can go become beautiful dancers, and that is success in dancing. Same thing with relationships. It's possible, despite mishaps, mistakes, failures in the past, because we didn't know that there was a protocol to follow. We can learn that protocol, which is called the effective dialogue of intimacy. And when we follow that, we learn these components, we put it together, the relationship becomes easy. That's the outcome. Relating to another person, being there with them through thick and thin, through ups and downs of life, becomes doable, manageable, in fact very enjoyable. Just like ballroom dancers go through competition, they masterfully showcase their abilities. Human beings can do that if they start to take relationships under control, under management, instead of just randomly believing on old-fashioned traditional thoughts that they can handle it themselves, or just follow others, follow other role models, like, again, parents or uncles, aunts, and things, or friends. I see a friend that has good relationship, semi-good relationship, not bad relationship. I say, okay, well, let me just do what they're doing. Disasters. So instead of that, what I would suggest is that you actually learn the details, the components of a dialogue of intimacy, and take your life and relationship and happiness under your control. Every human being is capable of learning these methods and changing their lives. I hope this will encourage you to take my invitation and learn those methods thoughtfully and thoroughly. So if you haven't already done so, make sure that you check out the video on the prelude to dialogue of intimacy. And otherwise, if you have done so and watched this video, enjoyed it, and ready to take the next step, check out the videos on the effective dialogue of intimacy, details step by step.